all Kodak Radio friends. We are continuing with our book, Message from a Teen in the Spirit World. Today it's a privilege for me to continue with this book. But I first want to show you something about Kodak Radio again, please. They just shared this book, Sex and Destiny, again on Kodak Radio on SoundCloud. So if you don't have the time to read a book, especially this one, this is a very educational book about sex and the sexual experiences and sexual conduct that influences our immortal soul. So I would really recommend for you to go and listen to this book if you don't have the time to read it. But let us continue with our book, and we are with Message from a Teen in the Spirit World, The Big Journey. Now this book is about a 14-year-old boy, and his name is Carlos. And the first two chapters, or the first two, I won't say chapters, but in the book is where he is a sick boy, and he's busy dying, and he's seeing all the people around him and the fear and the knowledge that he actually doesn't have much knowledge about death, and what he's heard isn't makes him in fear while he's actually dying. So the next one is Aunt Eunice, is the next chapter. I was looking for an expression of peace and cheerfulness on your faces, but it was no use. I would have given anything to see you smile. That would have eased my fear, but you were all dismayed and crying. I hoped Dr. Martino would try to cheer me up and assure me that it was all a passing crisis. But our good doctor took my pulse without trying to hide the sadness filling his soul. So the fear of dying grew stronger and stronger in my mind. When everything seemed beyond hope, something happened that grabbed my attention. A faint noise aroused my curiosity. I looked toward the doorway and saw that, in some unexplainable way, delicate flakes of a phosphorescent substance had begun appearing there. Those points of light seemed to be forming a fine cloak of airy gauze, and it looked like someone was moving beneath it. I was watching this oddity in amazement when the light curtain split apart and a pretty young lady appeared. I recognized her right away. She was the same lady that was in the big painting that Mum kept in the house. It was Aunt Eunice, Mum's little sister, who had died when you and I were still small. She was wearing a light green dress decorated with shining lace. A beautiful, radiant, blushing light surrounded her, especially her head and upper body. As if she was holding a hidden lamp, her dark eyes radiated unlimited sympathy and kindness. I was greatly surprised as Aunt Eunice entered the room, gave Mum a hug without Mum seeing her, and then sat down beside me and said, "Well, little Carlos, you are so brave. Are you afraid now? If it had been any other occasion, I think I wouldn't have behaved so well, because I had always heard that the dead are ghosts, and our aunt was already dead. but I was so distressed that I felt greatly comforted by her words of encouragement. I needed someone to cheer me up. I noticed Dad's nervousness, Mum's tears, and Dr. Martino's discouragement and sadness as he sat beside me. And I concluded that Aunt Eunice's good mood was just what I needed. Actually, in the good old days when I had been well, I'd heard strange stories about hauntings from the other world, which had felt such an impression on me, which had left such an impression on me that I couldn't sleep. But Aunt Eunice couldn't inspire fear in anyone. She was beautiful and smiling, filling me with trust and optimism. So I felt alive again, although I noticed an unpleasant stiffness in my body, which I couldn't move, not even a bit. How beautiful. So this book was written through the Spirit, Neio, Lucio. Carlos wanted to send his brother some letter from the spirit realm, and this is why this book was actually written as well. So this was what he noticed while he was busy dying. And so his aunt, or his mother's sister, who was already dead, he tells, she appears there and makes him feel better. He was actually feeling better because everybody around him was so sad. And he explains this whole feeling that he got about it. When I read this chapter, hi Andrea, when I read this chapter, I thought about when my mum was passing, and it was 14 years ago. That was my the first time I had actually been this close to death. So I was bathing my mum for the last time that I didn't even know. So she told me about this spirits in the family gathering in her room. So we were talking about that, and although I couldn't see them, she was telling me about them, and I could feel them, but I still didn't have it in my mind that my mother was actually passing. But that was the first time that I actually came into contact with death in that way, and this reminded me a lot about that. And the questions that came from her death, especially. And then that night she appeared to me. That was the first thing. So, but this is so wonderful to know, and especially through Spiritism. And there is a lot of books, especially through André Louis and all this, that explains all this transition from, or the spirits that explain this transition from death to the spirit world, or from the living to the spirit world, and how they experience their own death. And it is wonderful to know that we are always assisted, and especially like this boy Carlos are telling, in a child way, which is so beautiful, because it is important so that we can prepare our children as well for death. I can't even say how important it is to for them to know as well, to be prepared for death. Can I say it in that way? So this is why this book is so important, because it is written from a 14-year-old boy that is explaining his death and the spiritual realm as we will go through the book. But it's also important for the notice of how he feels while he was actually discarnating, and how he was assisted by the spiritual world. And we know that we are never alone, that we are always assisted. There are so many cases that the spirits will tell us that there's always assistance for every one of us when we pass from this realm to the next. And there was another case that I had of a boy, it's not very long ago, that I went to visit in the hospital, and which was very beautiful because he was in a car accident. He never really came back to consciousness in a way. He was like awake but not awake, not communicating. And I did know that through it was a correction being made, because there's a lot of things that wasn't done yet. So, and that is how beautiful it is if we know this beautiful what God helps us with to correct things before we actually go. And the second time when I went to him, I could communicate with his spirit, but not with his body. Wasn't responding. His body only responded through the machines when I was actually communicating with his spirit. But the thing is, when I saw him the last time, he saw the spirits. And so I didn't stay there because his mother, because he can see that he was seeing something. His mother got anxious, very anxious, so I left. But 3 days after that, he did pass. But the thing is that it is beautiful to know that in a calming way they come to assist us. And it is wonderful to know that we are never alone in anything, not even in our death, as well as in our birth, which is wonderful as well. We will continue next week with the book. There's another thing that I started before I forget. In the Spirit's book, there is a chapter on just some extra reading. I think it is in this book, it's in page 178, and it is the fate of children after death. And again, I am a big fan of Chico Xavier. The movie that he has on Chico's mothers is quite an amazing movie to watch. So I truly recommend, especially because the spirits do tell us that it's one of the hardest trials is to lose a child. But it is a beautiful movie to watch that explains through Chico why some spirits, and especially this chapter on children, the fate of children after death. And I will read you this question 197. It says, in the spirit of a child who dies very young is the spirit of a child who dies very young as advanced as that of an adult. And it says here, sometimes much more so, because the child may have had more experiences and may have therefore acquired more experiences, especially if he or she has progressed. But you can read, there's a lot of questions there, and there's so many books, especially through Henri Louis, that explains things, and especially Sunshine as well. Sunshine is busy with the book Heaven and Hell, which it's cases from Alan Kardec that he did through the mediums, for these cases of spirits that discarnate. So it's very good for us to do, and Sunshine is doing it in such a lovely way. It is actually wonderful to do it this way. So there's so many things that Kardec Radio gives us to occupy and to educate ourselves through so many people. So please join all these and just you can listen to it, you can watch it, and the energy to the communication and to the togetherness is so amazing. So to do this together, to work on these books together, and to have opinions. So please feel free to share your opinions and your experiences. It is very good for us to help each other in this. But next week we will continue with this, and the next chapter will be the good sleep. So and please, let's educate our children in wonderful ways, good ways, uplifting ways, because it is actually wonderful that death is not a bad thing. It is a wonderful thing. We will see each other there next week, the same time. Thank you so much. Bye-bye.